thank you. So welcome. Welcome. It's very nice to see such big crowds. Very nice that you are here to celebrate this very special day for Sophia. It's Sophia. She told me that you told her the last couple of weeks, months, don't bother me, I'm busy with my graduation. So very nice to have you here. And yeah, of course, after today, she will have all the time to do all of it. Also, a special welcome to the parents. So much. And special welcome to everyone online. Maybe some people from Costa Rica as well. Yeah. So, there we are. So my name is Marijke Mellis. I was chairing the last couple of months, well, the last half year, the graduation project of Sophia, and I did it together with Christina Sneekers, until Mandinga, who's not here, and Ineke van der Ham from Leiden University, and also the client, you could say. Yeah, Sophia worked on a very special project, but she will tell you all about it in the coming 30 minutes. We discussed that. 30 minutes. I only will share the program with you. So the coming 30 minutes, Sophia will give a presentation about what she did in her graduation. Then there will be 10-15 minutes time for questions from you, from the audience. Then we will go back upstairs and have first a closed meeting together with the supervisory team. Then Sophia will join. We will discuss the assessment, our assessment of your work. And then we will be back here around 5 minutes past 5, 10 minutes past 5 for the diploma ceremony. So I hope to see you all there again. But first, Shine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. We'll now start sharing the screen. Yes, right? Okay, perfect. Clicker here. Well, first, I would like to thank all of you. I know it's exam season, so the fact that you're all here as well, it's really like heartwarming for me. And today we're going to be talking about developmental topographical disorientation, which is a really long way of saying that feeling of being lost every day. And then for some people, it feels like there's not a reason for it, but there actually is. So to start, I'm going to tell you a story of one of the first times that I came to Delft. So I was on my way to visit a friend just for a normal lunch. It wasn't even coming to the campus. But then I got off at the tram number 1 and I had to walk a straight line all the way to my friend's place. It was 7 minutes walking. It was really not that big of a deal. It was a straight line. But then what happened, and many of you will probably laugh, because my phone died and I didn't check the route enough in the tram. So as soon as I got off, I remembered, okay, I need to go on a straight line. Easy, right? Just a straight line. I can do this, of course. So it was winter. So this is also why all the feelings of stress came up later, because it was windy and raining. But I started walking on a straight line and all that I could remember was this. So I couldn't see the streets. I just said, okay, straight line, keep going. And I couldn't even remember the place that I needed to go to, the house. So I ended up walking around and I even went to this bridge that you see over there. And I saw like, no, this is too big of a street. This doesn't make sense. So I need to go back. And after 30, I think, minutes of being stressed, feeling super guilty because I was leaving my friend waiting, I decided to go into the shopping mall that's over there and buy a phone charger. And so as soon as I managed to call my friend and told her, the first thing she asked is, are you lost? I'm like, yeah. She's like, do you want me to go get you? I'm like, no, I have my phone. It's fine. I'll be there. I'm just so sorry. So what was I feeling at this point? So a combination of stress, guilt, and disappointment. And stress because I had to be on time somewhere that I was already super late. And guilt because I was wasting my own time but my friend's time, because I had no way to tell her, hey, I'm gonna be there, just wait for me a bit longer. And the disappointment in myself of, yeah, how could I not do a straight line? It was the easiest thing possible, and I still couldn't make it. So I don't have a spatial orientation impairment. I consider myself to be okay reading maps and also remembering them. But what happened? What went wrong? And that's the fact that I didn't check the route while I was in the tram. I could totally look at the map a bit longer, and then I would have had more of a visual image in my mind. And the reason that I still remember this experience, even though it was 3 years ago, is because it was kind of traumatic for me because I almost never get lost. So the fact that I was being lost because I didn't check my phone just felt really disappointing to me. So do all people visualize maps in the same way? That is not true. This is where this DTD, developmental topographical disorientation, comes into play. And topographical disorientation is basically when you have no ability to have spatial orientation, or you don't have a good proportion in your mind of where things are located. You cannot see visually a very good mental map. And when it's developmental, it happens that you have lived with it your entire life. So you can have just topographical disorientation if you had a stroke or a brain injury, but there's people that just don't have an explanation of why they're not good with maps, and other people they are. So DTD is actually kind of a recent discovery, less than 50 years ago. And one of the definitions is the lifelong inability to orient in extremely familiar surroundings, despite the absence of any acquired brain injury or damage. And the key word here is extremely familiar surroundings. So if you feel like you get lost all the time, but you get lost in parking lots or a big shopping mall, then that's super common. Like, it takes us a while to actually create this mental image in our head of where things are located. But these people with DTD, they struggle with that in their own neighborhood, in the campus. Even though they have studied here for 2 years, they still struggle finding where things are and kind of visualizing it in their mind. And there are many names that, because this is kind of new, there still hasn't been, or up until now with Inike, one of my supervisors, research, they have been trying to basically make the name and the definition for it. But some people say that it's spatial aphantasia, and then that's a different thing, because aphantasia is when you cannot see images in your head at all. So there might be a relationship, there might not be. We don't know yet because there's not enough research, but it's on the way. And just to give you guys an example of Delft, which is where we are all now, we can kind of remember where things are located. So we know that the new church is somewhere over there, and before the new church is the Jumbo. And if we go this way, we can also go to the station, going through a bridge. So this is how we see maps around us. Now, really important to notice here that there's different routes to get to where we want to go. And somebody with DTD might not have the view of different routes. They just know, okay, I have one route to go to the supermarket, to the new church, and it's in a straight line, and that's it. Or another possible view is that people with DTD, they don't specifically place in the map where things are located, but they just focus on the order. So first comes the supermarket. Oh no, never mind. First comes the bridge, then the supermarket, then the new church. And somewhere in between, there's a station, but I don't know specifically where. And kind of to close this intro part, there's two ways of visualizing your space around you. So you have the egocentric point of view, which has to do with yourself, where you're located. So taking this point as a reference, Aula is over there, electrical engineering over there, architecture here, and we are at the EO building, right? And then the allocentric point of view is if we take ourselves out of the equation and we're seeing it from a map view, and where are those things located to each other without us in the middle. So basically this translation of like, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and this is how it looks like from a top view. This is where DTD kind of gets in the way, because it's not easy to interpret, okay, this is the building that I'm seeing, but is it actually this that it's on the map over here? No, does it make sense? There's no colors. Satellite view has too many things to focus on. So this is where there's a bit of a struggle. And another thing with DTD is also it doesn't apply just to outdoor spaces, but also indoor spaces. So you can see how a person with DTD doesn't view the proportions of the rooms of where they're located. They just focus on the order. So this is also taken from research done by the people who were starting to research DTD. And basically you could say, hey, I have DTD, right? I get lost in environments super easily. But if you haven't had this since you can remember, like you were little or you started gaining your independence, or if you have a brain or a neurological condition, and also concussions do apply to maybe have some spatial orientation damage in there, but you could have DTD. So is it really a problem? Kind of, yeah. For some people, they might say like, yeah, we have Google Maps, we don't need spatial orientation anymore. But then the feelings that come every time that you get lost, it's like the story that I told you in the beginning, that I felt ashamed, I felt sad, and then there's people that actually feel this almost every single day. The thing is, because they're so used to getting lost, then the strength of the feeling is not as strong as if you have it all at once, like it happened to me. But still, something really important to notice is that for some people, it's really intense, like it takes a toll on their self-confidence, because if you're growing up and then people call you dumb because you cannot draw the map, or you cannot find the place that you were supposed to go to play after school, or in video games, maybe you were not as good, so the people will call you dumb, right? Because in video games, sometimes you need to like go through around the map and things like that. But yeah, so it is a problem. And seeing how we always have a map on our, a phone in our hands and a map in our phones, is it still a problem? This is what we kind of discovered through the research project. And this thesis was divided into the double diamonds for those who know about design. And if not, it's just the methodology of saying, okay, we first discover everything that there is to do with spatial orientation and DTD and wayfinding guidelines. And then we define it into what are we going to use it for. And then the second part is the design part, which was coming up with ideas and then testing them out with actual participants. So for this, a really quick summary of the desk research that I did. So based on DTD is what I just told you now and a bit more, but keeping it really high level, because if not, I could talk about this for 2 hours. But also for navigational technology, what is the state currently of, we know Google Maps, but there's so many other ways that there's wayfinding design around us, and also wayfinding guidelines. So which are the design principles in which currently all the things that are designed are based on. So I was telling you before that the navigational aids, there's multiple types. Google Maps is not the only thing that exists. And there's also an interesting thing called the wayfinding design. So if you have been to an airport or a shopping mall, and also even to the beach, then there are certain visual cues that let you know where you need to go. And this is really important because when it's a really big place and you have no idea where you need to go, you have to follow something, right? We don't usually have wayfinding design. We do have it in the streets, but sometimes the street names can be blocked by a tree or they're just not there. So it can become a bit complicated. And in also big level, these navigational aids, everything that exists right now can be divided into a classification that I made based on this, like how much support do they give to the user? So do they take all the decisions for the user? Or does the user have to take all the decisions, or is there something in between? So for example, Google Maps is semi-automatic because it shows you the map, but it also shows you the route that you need to take. So if it was only a paper map, then that would be manual because a person needs to make all the decisions. And if it was fully automatic, then there's, basically the most extreme version of Google Maps. But then there are other, for example, navigation fashion, which is shoes that vibrate depending on which direction you need to go walking. And yeah, this is just the system telling you what to do, and then the user has no say in it. And so in summary, from the big literature review, then DTD apparently is really common. It is estimated to be in almost 3% of the population. This was tested with Italian researchers. And that people with DTD use landmarks. So the same way that I was showing you the new church and how that locates in the map, or the bridge, or the supermarket, then this is the way that DTD people use. So you will rarely hear somebody saying north, south, east, but they will just say like, oh yeah, the EO building, and then close to the EO building, there's the aula. Yeah, what I told you before, that getting lost because they have it really often, then it doesn't make them so stressed. But what they do happen, like what they do is that they create coping strategies. So basically they avoid, if, for example, going to dinner at a friend's house already requires you to think of a place to go, then invite them over to your house. Then you avoid the situation. Or they just rely, for example, people with DTD would sometimes get a partner that would be really good at navigation. So then you don't have to make the decisions anymore. And the other important thing about this literature review is that the time constraint is one of the most decisive factors in which how critical the situation will be and how stressful it will actually be. If you're just having a stroll on a Sunday, then you will probably not get stressed about navigation than if you're late for an appointment. Yeah, so from this literature review, there were still a few questions that were not answered. And for this, I did some user research with the goal to see if lifelong low navigational skills, what were the daily experiences in younger adults than previous research. And then the reason which is lifelong low navigational skills is because of to not have or not depend on a DTD diagnosis. So people can identify as having low navigational skills, but then that doesn't mean that they have DTD, but it could also be a DTD potentially, because this is not a very known condition, which is why some people may have it and they don't know it. And secondly, how can this understanding of daily experiences inform the development of wayfinding guidelines tailored specifically to technology? And then these wayfinding guidelines can be better for developmental topographical disorientation. And there were 5 themes that we will see in a bit with the results, but the interviews consisted of giving them a sensitizing booklet in which they would have to do some activities a few days before. So when you get to the interview, you actually have something to talk about, and it's not this big question of saying like, okay, when was the last time you got lost? If I ask you this, and you're gonna think, I don't know. But instead, with the sensitizing booklet, then they would have to go through specific activities that would make them think about how do they use navigational resources around them to navigate. And lastly, they would go through a navigation test that will tell them how good they actually are in navigation. And this was done with 9 participants, students and recent graduates of TU Delft, that they would self-identify as having no navigational skills, but also they would go through a screening survey, which was basically the requirements that was before that, that you have it your entire life, that you don't have any other brain injury, and that you develop basically that you feel that you get lost really quickly. So this is an image of how the sensitizing booklet worked. And honestly, this was one of my favorite parts of the whole research, because it was so gratifying to see how the people took it really seriously. And then they made a timeline out of one of the experiences in which they were navigating. And they had stickers that they could also put to indicate which emotions they were feeling and when was the moment in which they gave up and took their phone again. So a participant also sent a screenshot of like, okay, this is the route that I had to take. It was not so difficult, but then I got into this intersection that had 2 ways to go to the same way. This is confusing. So the sensitizing booklet also would show how they would map the indoor, like their apartment. And this also showed something really interesting. One of the participants, instead of saying, okay, we have wall number 1, wall number 2, wall number 3, and then this is the inside, then this person would start up, okay, I have my couch. And then behind my couch, there's the window. And then from the other side, there's the door. So we see this egocentric navigation style, even indoors, which is really interesting, at least for the findings. And finally, they did the wayfinding questionnaire, which was developed by the Van der Helm Lab. And they basically did a questionnaire that tells you, okay, how good do you feel yourself subjectively that you're with navigation? And then you would go through a virtual environment and you would get some questions asked later of like, okay, which were the landmarks that you saw when you saw this object? Which direction did you go? Or where could this be located in a map? And the results were the 5 points that we were talking about before. So the impact on daily life it's really difficult to say, okay, there's one homogeneous impact for everybody that has TD, because navigational experience vary completely from person to person and what their lifestyle is. But cycling would be the activity that would be regarded as most difficult, because walking, you have a lot of time to make a decision, and then driving, you always depend on GPS. Also, it's longer distances, so it's really difficult to kind of visualize it in your mind. The emotions related to wayfinding, so people, this target group specifically, they didn't get affected as much as past research, and that can be because they have a higher educational status as some of the people in the research. So basically, being good with or bad with spatial orientation doesn't affect their perception of intelligence. They can say like, hey, I'm in university and smart, right? If I get lost often, that doesn't mean I'm dumb. And in general, they didn't feel that much towards spatial orientation because they depend a lot on Google Maps. And I myself, like everybody does it, which takes me to the other 2 points, which was, okay, there's a high dependence on navigation technology, but because of that high dependence, there's a perceived sense of autonomy, saying like, okay, yeah, I can just navigate. This is not something that's really difficult for me because I can just have my map everywhere that I go. And yeah, in conclusion, the user group is less affected than other people who specifically grew up without Google Maps. And this reliance on technology really provides autonomy, but we don't know if it's actually full autonomy or is it just perceived. And because of this dependence on technology, we are not incentivizing or not motivating ourselves to actually train the spatial orientation skills, because we just depend on it. And then you have situations like I had, in which I trusted that I would have my phone, and then I would almost be crying in the middle of Delft in a rainy day because I couldn't find my way. But yeah, so basically we should provide opportunities for this cognitive engagement, and a way that that has been written down before is through wayfinding guidelines, which were studied. And this was specifically a document saying, okay, this is the way that when you're designing wayfinding, you should consider this, 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 and this. And then specifically for accessibility, so people who are handicapped, for dementia, and for fast-paced environments, because it's really, these are skills that can be translated into how to make wayfinding easier for everybody. And this is where we're gonna come into this was the first diamond, and now we're in the middle, and defining, okay, after everything that was searched, what is actually the problem, or what can be done through design. So we're now in the middle of the 2 diamonds, and defining the problem requires defining a design goal, which is what it's going to be designed for. So the design goal at this point would be to bridge the gap between the map-based experience, so the allocentric view, and the real-world experience, which is how I am seeing it egocentrically, and by using engaging technology that stimulates spatial orientation skills. But really importantly, this is like, okay, we're designing technology that stimulates spatial orientation skills to depend less on technology, because we don't want to be stuck or depending on our phones all the time. And here in design, we tend to use metaphors really often. So basically a metaphor to guide the design concept would be to think that the system is a tour guide, and then basically the user is being guided by the tour guide. And the user can decide whether they want to be really in front of the tour guide, following everything that they're saying, or if they just want to relax and kind of see the view, take some pictures, maybe miss some of the information, but it's okay because they have the choice. So the tour guide, the system in this case, will be entertaining, accurate, but also allow the user to have this autonomy. And the user in that case will feel guided, committed to actually wanting to learn these things, and informed. So from here onwards, having defined this design goal and direction vision, the first step was to see like, okay, what is actually the wayfinding system? What are all the elements that go into it? So we have the environment, and then we can have it here. The environment has wayfinding elements. So a window can be a wayfinding element because it tells you where outside is, but also the signs that this is the emergency exit, this is wayfinding. And then we have the user, which is us, and how we interact with the system around us. So in this case, it's more looking, but sometimes in the case of Google Maps, then it would be more of a direct interaction. And this is where I define guidelines of how every element of this ecosystem should be. So the wayfinding elements, really obvious, they should be logically placed and they should have a lot of contrast with the environment so they're easy to see. And in turn, the environment should not have that many competing stimuli. Like if you have seen at the sometimes airports or stations that there's ads in front of ads and in front of the directions, this is not a good distribution. Then the navigation system would be the actual navigational aid, and this should be adaptable to the user pattern. So if we know that already a user is always going through the same routes, why are we going to make them do something different? And finally, the user interaction, the user should feel like they're being encouraged to actually use their spatial orientation skills, and they should feel kind of like guided towards the place that they need to go. And there was a case study for these wayfinding guidelines. So this is like the past chart is a nice way of showing a really long and probably boring table. But yeah, just so you see what things are being exemplified with Google Maps is that they have a egocentric to allocentric translation view, right? What we were talking before, but nobody knows about it, or they do and it doesn't work. So what's happening here? The problem is that yes, there is the translation, but they show in the egocentric point of view everything. So how can you remember all the steps that you need to take by looking at the whole environment and then seeing everything around? It takes too much time. So this current system is not working. This is where the ideas come in and the fun part and being creative, where also with a few design colleagues, I ideated different concepts. So one of the concepts would be like, okay, what happened if the system would give you a personalized song per route that you do? So from home to here, the faculty, then you have a specific song that tells you the directions you need to go. Then another one would be a virtual reality environment in which you need to do a treasure hunt. So you do it at home and then you go out into the world and you know where you need to go because you already played it in a game. Another idea was to make totems in the city that you could, or even the totems could be people, and then you could go them and ask them for directions. Or a really simple, like having a system in the bike that basically shows you the landmarks that you need to go to. And you would have to probably take it off and put it on again. Same thing as with the phone. Like, okay, we could just put our phones in the bike and see the map. But we don't do it, right? Because it's too much hassle. Nobody has time for this. So yeah, there's the concept, like, okay, which was the chosen concept? And for this, I used the attributes from the interaction vision, so the tour guide, which concept felt more like a tour guide. And these concepts were really rough. So if I had detailed them even more, they could have probably achieved maximum score in all of them. But for at least at that point, the one that was most interesting was the personalized route songs. And this is basically, imagine having a metro, like a personalized metro map in which your most done route would be a route, right? So if I go already to my home to the faculty, then that's one route. To my home to the station, then there's another route. And each of these routes, you could visualize them really easily because it uses your own landmarks, right? Like the landmarks that you are already used to. So there's no need to learn new things because your phone knows where you are all the time. So why not use that to your advantage? And the funny thing is that each of these routes would have a song that comes to it, right? So instead of hearing the usual turn left at the roundabout, take the second exit. So what if this was embedded into a song that actually had in a genre that you would like? And then you could listen to this song while you're going on the route, and then it lasts precisely the time that it takes you to go from one place to the other. This sounds really cool, but in reality, you're thinking like, okay, do I need to design a song? Does that actually work? Then that means I need to depend on the system again, because I need to listen to the song while I'm going. So how to actually design a song for navigation? And this is where mnemonics comes into play, which mnemonics is basically grabbing something that has nothing to do and giving it a meaning that helps you remember order or terms, or so you can see it. There's with games, so peg method, which is okay, 4 to the floor, and things like that. It's just rhyming. And then musical mnemonics, maybe to some of you here, and I'm curious to see how many, it's a surprise that ABCD, the alphabet song, is the same melody as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So this happens because our brain is capable of grabbing 2 different sets of lyrics and putting it with the same melody, and then this helped us learn the order of ABCD. And also another thing that served as an inspiration was in Australia, Aboriginal cultures would sometimes have this called song lines. Back in the time where there was no technology, they would have to travel far distances and they had no maps. So the way that they would get the information across is that they would sing a story. And then the story would tell about a warrior who went to the other side of the river, and then to cross the river had to make a canoe, and that had to carve a canoe out of the tree because of the so then basically the people would go and look for a tree, which is a landmark. And yeah, so to create the musical mnemonic, basically I did turn the song, the directions into a song that would rhyme, and this would also go with the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So the ones that participated later in the experiment had to hear me singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to these lyrics, which maybe made it remember because I cannot sing well, so maybe it improved. But yeah, so this concept wouldn't actually work. This is what we do an experiment for. And some people participated in an experiment which the goal was to see if a mnemonic aid can improve the retainability of the landmarks. So, okay, can we remember them? And also the traceability. So how easy are they to spot and to translate this thing that I saw before? And for this, I did the navigational aid, which is the concept. It's just a map that has the directions in a sang way, and then a virtual environment and evaluation materials. So the navigational aid was 2 versions of routes, and then for each of these versions, there would be 6 decision points that they needed to remember. But this decision point was the same as so it's 6 steps, but in reality you have to take like 20 decisions because you also have to decide the streets in between. And then there would be a virtual environment, which basically was just a video of you cycling, and then you had to choose the direction to take after seeing these directions written down in the song way. Oh yeah, so this is what I was talking about before, that okay, these are the 6 steps that you need to take, but in reality you need to take like 20 decisions. And this is how the translation would be from the egocentric point of view, so the visual representation, into the virtual environment. And the evaluation tools would be focused on saying how subjectively, how did they feel towards the system? So do they think it's trustworthy? Basically going to the guidelines that I had already said before and saying, okay, does this actually work with the concept? And the other part of the evaluation tools was saying, okay, in each of the steps, what did they remember the most? Was it the visual representation, or was it the song, or was it the map, so the blue line? And yeah, this is just to show that there was 16 participants who did this experiment, and 16 was the minimum that was needed because we had route number 1 and route number 2, and also we had route number 1 with a song and route number 1 without a song, and the same on the other side. So in order to make it statistically valid, there would need to be 4 people at least with every combination. So that's why 16, it happened like this, but it was achievable, which is good. And going into the experiment, I had already a few hypotheses that came from a pilot test before. And I'm going to skip right onto, before explaining them, okay, were they correct? So I thought in the beginning that if there was the mnemonic aid, then there would be less errors. But in reality, there were the same amount of errors, just not in the decision points. So adding a mnemonic aid doesn't actually reduce the amount of mistakes, it just shifts the places where it happens. We will see a bit more about this in a bit. But then yeah, unsurprisingly, participants relied on the visual representation more than on the song and the lyrics. And the street names were kind of ignored at some points, and at some points they were actually kind of useful. So overall, yeah, the participants were really skeptical about learning a song that would help you with navigation. So they said like they wouldn't actually do it in their day-to-day life. And yeah, this is just to show you like, okay, so with a song and without a song, where were the mistakes happening? So with a song, the mistakes didn't happen in the decision points, but then those mistakes shifted somewhere else. And just skip a bit here to make it easy and more entertaining for you guys and not go so much into the data. So the visual representation was the thing that was observed the most. And then the order, which makes sense with what we know about participants with possible DTD. And then the melody didn't make a difference at all, but the lyrics sometimes would help almost at the same time as the words were chosen. And from the subjective results, basically there was only one big difference between having a song and not having a song. And that is actually that the system without a song was the people felt less independent. So independency does relate to a song. Crazy. So yes, in conclusion, the MMA improved, the musical mnemonic A improved the recall of the landmarks. So okay, it makes people remember them better, but people remember them better, but they didn't know what to do. So if it was right or left, that didn't translate so well. And yes, so basically, the more salient, and this is what we call the more recognizable the landmark was, the less the mnemonic was needed. Because yeah, it's easy to remember the big white house that stands alone, but it's not easy to remember the street that I need to take if it's the third to the right, to the left. And then overall, the cognitive load increased when a song was added. So adding a song just makes it more complicated, more things to remember. So it's not really necessary. And also what was observed in the participants is that the second time that they did a route, it was way faster and they knew what they needed to do. So experience does also help with remembering better and performing better in the experiment. So to kind of wrap up really quickly, I'm going to give you a few tips. If you ever get to design, if you ever get to see wayfinding systems, then you know what's being done correctly and what isn't. So really easy, just give the simplest route. And giving the simplest route doesn't necessarily is the one with the less steps, but also the simplest route can be like, okay, where you can follow water. That's a really easy landmark to follow. So not necessarily the most efficient route is the one that people literally would want to take because they need to remember new things. Then which landmarks are easier to recognize? So of course, the landmarks that are big, permanent, and with nothing else in between have a big contrast. Those are really easy to remember. And then the landmarks that would be a small statue at the other side of the street would be really easy to miss. And of course, the the houses that just look with red bricks, as is in the city center everywhere. Those houses are everywhere, so maybe not use those as landmarks to orient yourselves. And then finally, if you're going to see Google Maps and you're going to have a visual representation of a specific landmark, always be consistent with what you're showing. So you show the direction, what you need to focus on, and then you give the instructions. And the instructions don't necessarily just need to be like, okay, turn left, right here, but also you can give more information. So if you know that this is a mistake that you do often, your system can tell you, hey, I've noticed that I've seen you do this before. Why do you keep doing it? Just focus on this. So final conclusions of the entire project. Did it achieve its initial objectives? So yes, because specific design recommendations were made, and it proved to be a challenge because we are not fully sure yet what people with DTD see or not see, but the wayfinding guidelines that were proposed can apply for everybody. So if you make it really simple for one target group, then that makes it also easier for the rest of the target groups. Then the navigation technology was analyzed, and then there were the specific recommendations that were given with a design concept. And the research broadened by talking to people. Now there's more awareness of what DTD is, and also this shows us what are other ways of seeing around us, like our map around us. And then the limitations were that there was a lack of awareness of DTD, which is what I just told you. And then that having an experimental approach made it really locked in, like, okay, you can only test one thing to make sure that you're actually testing this thing, which was the mnemonic aid. So if you go out into the world and you are exposed to your environment, there are a lot of things that are happening around you that are affecting the way that you orient yourself. So this was a bit limiting. But yeah, so if the experiment would be done again, I would recommend testing with different ages, different cultures, because here in the Netherlands, you cycle a lot, but in other countries, you don't really, at least not in Costa Rica, we never cycled for this. So yeah, testing it out and also seeing like, okay, how does a route work in reverse? Is it also easy to remember with the song? Or take it to the indoor navigation. So seeing around in the building, does it work the same as it would do with outdoor navigation? And something that I would have loved to do with this, but I didn't have the time, would be to repeat the experiment exactly the same 3 days after. So just show the people the two routes and see, okay, which one actually the people remember the most, the one with the song or without a song. So there are a lot of things that can be done with experiments, which shows that DTD is an area that has a lot of opportunity to do some research in. And in general, for the whole project, I would love to recommend to architecture people and like city maker, the municipalities, to promote that local artists do statues or arts, because this is creating easier landmarks that are not just the red brick houses. And finally, well, in this case, I interpreted a lot of what the people were saying about how they visualize a map. But for next continuation of a research, it would be nice to actually ask those people to design for themselves. So doing co-creation sessions with them to know, they're the experts, they're the ones who know exactly, and then there's no need for the designer to kind of guess how is it that it looks like in their head. So I would like to really thank you for your attention. I'm a bit over time. But yes, are there any questions? Take a few minutes for questions.
Well, do you take in consideration that the difference in cities, for example, in New York, everything is clockwise, with people as bad there?
Well, there's no specific database for research now that compares culturally. Okay, there are differences and also in the environment that you're based. In Costa Rica, we have this really funny way of doing directions. So we never say, I live on this street, this number. We just say, okay, from the big ice cream store that you know, everybody knows is this ice cream store. And then you have to go 100 meters and then turn north. And then another, after you pass the train line, you turn left. So we do a lot of egocentrical based directions. And this is maybe really specific to Costa Rica. But yeah, I don't know specifically. I don't know if there's any research, but it would be really interesting to see how your environment actually affects your orientation.
Yeah, I was curious about, because you mentioned that the lyrics in your experiment did help a little bit, or to some extent. And so can you explain more about how it helped? Or
Yeah, wait, if I can go back to, there's a thing that explains it. Yeah. So here, it's a graph that basically shows the confidence level, and then this is the amount of mistakes. So when we see like, okay, when the lyric would be really easy, so for example, this roundabout, the obelisk, it was straight and tall, the obelisk, second exit, there's no risk. So it rhymes and it's easy, and it was an easy landmark. So this rhyming, making it kind of absurd as well and kind of like weird, did help remember like, huh, wait, obelisk? Okay, I know this. But it also backfired a few times because, for example, the name of the street was Regentesselaan, and then one of the lyrics was like, okay, here the king is always right. That's why he became regent of his land. And then people didn't make this connection. So sometimes if the lyric is really absurd and funny and directly translates to what you're seeing, it works. But if it requires some extra thinking, then it actually does more, adds cognitive load than what's actually necessary.
you need to curate a song very well.
Yeah. It's not just rhyming as I figured it out with this experiment. this.
Like, have you done any prior, like a pilot test before the final evaluation?
Yeah.
Of your concept?
Yeah, wait. So before actually testing it, wait, it's in the hidden slides. But when I was skipping. But yeah, there was a pilot done before the actual test that was with a different route, and then this route was really easy, which had a windmill and then a big roundabout and a long distance. So I tested with somebody that self-identifies as having ETD, and they said like, yeah, I don't have a problem with remembering a windmill. Duh, it's big, it's there, I know it. I have a problem with the everyday houses that look the same, the everyday corners and the streets that are really narrow. So that's where I had to create 2 new routes, and then that also delayed the time schedule a bit. But it was really good insight to do this pilot test with just one person, because that already gives you an idea of what to expect. And this is where the hypothesis that I was explaining before, that's where they came from. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, June.
You said like you just said the egocentric is from this ice cream shop like 100 meters. Is there a correlation between people with DTD? So that?
Yeah. So
and people who cannot like see what 100 meters is. Personally, I would have no idea what 100 meters would.
So I don't know if I speak for all Costa Ricans, but at least I can speak for myself and maybe. Okay, so we say that 100 meters is a block. So it's not actual 100 meters of distance. It's just like, okay, until you see the first street, which doesn't make that much sense. But yeah, most of the people that I have been talking, they don't have no idea what 100 meters actually is. And since I hadn't heard about DTD before I came to the Netherlands, I don't know how it is in Costa Rica. But basically, the distance is a construct that you give yourself. So in one of the concepts I was showing, like, okay, in between landmarks, maybe it's easier to show how many minutes you need to wait. So if it's just cycling for maybe like 5 minutes, of course, it would depend on how fast the person cycles. Maybe this is more efficient than saying, okay, cycle for 1 kilometer and then worry about your next landmark. I'm not sure, but it would be cool to know. There are 2 comments in the chat. Maybe they are also.
Yes. Thank you, Sophia. It was super interesting to watch. Having about this. And super interesting indeed. Well done, Sophia. So no questions online, but if you have one online, feel free to write it and I will read it.
Well, we do one. There's one last question, because then we have to continue with the rest of the
Okay, so my question is, when you're on a bike, sometimes you get a lot of stressful situations, and you're in a roundabout on all sides. In those cases, if you had them in your route, did you also see an improvement with the song? So when there is more stress, did the song help more, or did it even make it even more stressful and then?
Yeah, for these specific routes, the ones that I recorded, it was on a live environment. So at some point it was me cycling, so surprise. But yeah, at some points I would get like a person in front of me, and then I would have to like skip them, and then I would get the comment from the people doing the experiment like, you cycle so well, right? And I'm like, yeah, no. But so basically there are a lot of things that are happening around, and then that might distract you from the lyrics, and then you need to go back to thinking like, okay, wait, what is it that I was actually looking for? You know, the order. And then that's where I saw that people with low navigational skills, they don't rely as much in the lyrics, but they would rely on the order. So they would say like, okay, wait, I already did the roundabouts, I already did this, okay, so this comes next. So I'm hoping that maybe the lyrics kind of help them guess which would be the next thing coming, like deep down in their subconscious, but out loud they didn't mention that it was actually like I don't know if that answers.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for the great questions. Thank you again for the great presentation.